Good afternoon, everybody. I've been told to hold this microphone right up to my mouth, and that way you're going to be able to hear me and not be distracted by the cheers when somebody gets their new toy. So I'm here this afternoon to talk a little bit about AMBA 4. AMBA 4 is the fourth generation of ARM's microcontroller bus architecture. That's the fundamental architecture that we define with the industry for connecting together processors in a SoC design. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of a history, a walk through history. I told you. So somebody's won the iPad. Clearly none of you won the iPad, and I didn't win the iPad either. So I'm looking back to 1992 here, when devices were quite simple. And the kind of performance of these devices was in the tens of megahertz and the tens of MIPS. And I fast forward 20 years to kind of 2012 on the right here, my left. And performance is in the gigahertz, and the kind of number of MIPS that we're looking at now is in the region of 7,000. And the systems that go with these performance points, clearly very simple device, simple ARM, DSP, memory access on the left. And then on the right, many core CPU, companion GPUs, video, so on and so forth. So performance really has gone up quite significantly over the past 20 years. And so has AMBA evolved to support those different SoC designs. 3 generations of AMBA are out in the market today. And AMBA 4 really is designed to help people build even more complicated and more complex heterogeneous multiprocessor implementations. I've kind of got a generic picture here of a couple of A-class CPUs, graphics engine, video, LCD controller, some real-time processors, some I/O, and some interconnect and memory system here. And the problem that we're trying to avoid, and the one we're trying to solve, and is embedded within the AMBA 4 specification, is the introduction of coherency. Coherency is a really important word. I want you to remember that one, okay? And the reason why it's important is because we're trying to reduce off-chip traffic. Every time a transaction goes off-chip to memory, we're burning power, and we're kind of holding back performance. So we're not truly realizing the maximum performance we can achieve through our SoC design. As you can see from this beautiful diagram, various different masters are all trying to access scarce memory bandwidth and memory resource. Not necessarily all at the same time, but quite often with use cases these days, GPU, CPU acting on shared data structures, perhaps complemented by the video engine. And these guys are very bandwidth generative engines, all trying to access a scarce resource such as memory down here. So really our goal with AMBA 4, when we started to specify it around 5 years ago, we were preempting the traffic that we're now seeing being designed into SoCs back 5 years ago, and actually beyond for that matter. And we couldn't really have envisaged the performance points, but we could look at the PC market, draw some analogies from that, and then work on the basis that traffic flows will be similar to those in the devices that you guys are designing today. So the challenge or the goal here is to minimize off-chip transactions, and coherency is one mechanism and one piece of computer science that's reasonably well proven in massively scalable computer architectures of the past kind of 20 years, but very new in embedded markets, and definitely very new in the kind of embedded markets that ARM is traditionally associated with, which is set-top, dish TV, and then portable devices such as mobiles and tablets. So I'm going to remind you about why we need coherency. We need it because we've got many more processors, domain-specific processors. We need it because we're trying to minimize off-chip traffic, and we're doing that for performance and power control reasons. We need it because the software community needs a standardized implementation of coherency. And moving coherency from the software layer into hardware makes it more consistent for software developers to develop for that processor environment and that compute complex. And there's different ways of achieving coherency. You know, traditionally, no caching, straight to external memory. Software coherency, which is kind of an overhead for the CPU in doing those cache cycle maintenances. And then the preferred option that we're promoting through AMBA 4 today is hardware managed coherency, which we think is far more scalable than software, and and certainly allows you to maximize performance and power efficiency. So with AMBA 4 Phase 2, which we published on Monday, a 360-odd page document. So if you're feeling like you need to get home and immerse yourself in this brand new specification, please feel free to do so. We've been developing this spec with around 30 of our major partners in the world, everybody from EDA through operating system, through OEM and into our semiconductor partnership. And AMBA 4 comes in several different flavors: ACE, ACE Lite, and the phase 1 of the specification, which we launched last year, AXI 4, AXI Lite, and AXI Stream. And they address slightly different problem spaces, but the one I wanted to draw your attention back to today is ACE. And ACE really supports 3 pieces of computer science. It supports coherency, barriers, and distributed virtual memory. I'll touch on the latter 2 in a moment. The great news is that AXI 4 is built upon AXI 3 for robustness reasons, and the ACE is built upon AXI 4 again for robustness reasons. So we're really extending existing specifications and making them far more resilient and introducing new techniques such as coherency. So the Cortex-A15 is the first CPU in ARM's family to support full cache coherency. The Mali T604 GPU is the first graphics processor to support I/O coherency, that's ACE Lite. There's a whole spectrum of ARM processors, some supporting, as I've just mentioned, full coherency in the form of the A15, the Mali I/O coherency, and somewhere in the middle A5 and Cortex-A9. I'm going to take you to the next piece of new news inside AMBA 4, which is the support for distributed virtual memory. The idea here is very, very straightforward. Each of these masters up here, we're trying to create the illusion that it's got its own dedicated memory. In reality, of course, it's sharing memory down here. And the reason for doing that is we're trying to create a consistent view of memory system. This is called I/O virtualization, where each of these masters believes it has control over the memory. And we've got some clever memory mapping techniques going on here. And all I wanted to draw your attention to today was that inside the AMBA 4 Phase 2 specification, we're recommending the use of DVM signaling to manage the TLBs inside the MMUs, to manage the I/O virtualization. Barriers, again, not new news in supercomputers, but in embedded markets, reasonably new. And again, this is all about managing transactions in a very strongly ordered memory system. Of course, for most of the SoC designs today, they're reasonably weakly ordered, and you're optimizing for performance and power efficiency. So I think I'm going to get my message in a minute to get off stage. So we reorder for maximum performance or for minimizing energy consumption. So here's a system we built earlier. It's got all the pieces in it that are AMBA 4 ready. So the cache coherent interconnect to support cache coherency between the CPU clusters, I/O coherency to snoop into the caches of the CPUs. It supports the DVM signaling for the TLB maintenance here, which allows you to have one consistent view of external memory, and you're virtualizing that memory system. And so it's coherency, tick, DVM, tick, and then finally barriers and support for memory barriers for that strongly ordered memory system for those particular use cases where you need that. So in summary then, AMBA 4's arrived. We've been working on it for many years now, at least 5 that I'm aware of. It replaces and subsumes AMBA 3, sorry. So we're taking all the goodness that's baked into the AMBA 3 specification, the tools community out there, and we're extending that with ACE, the coherency extensions. If you want to find resources on this, then please, oh, I don't have that slide in this deck, that's really useful. There are a set of resources. If you just go to arm.com or choose a search engine of your preference, type in AMBA 4, or you go to amba.com, you can go and find the spec, read all about it. There's some resources there in terms of designing a coherent system. It's a great webinar that I would thoroughly recommend you go and pick up. There's white papers from our partners such as Jasper who are talking about verifying the state space for coherency. Again, I recommend you go and dig out those white papers and immerse yourself in it. If you're designing a multi-core heterogeneous SoC that involves a Cortex-A15 or a Mali GPU in the next 12 or 24 months, you need to start getting your head around coherency. There's plenty of resources emerging in the market to explain what coherency is, how to take advantage of it, how to work with your software partners, and how to build better SoCs. So in summary then, it's time to think about your traffic flows, your traffic patterns, which devices are fully coherent, usually typically CPU, CPU, which ones are I/O coherent, definitely GPU, possibly video, possibly DMA, so on and so forth. Which ones are completely non-coherent, so they're your traditional peripherals that don't need to snoop the cache of the CPU, so they continue as they were, no change. You need to start thinking about the flow of traffic through the memory system. You need to think about quality of service schemes. You need to think about managing the priority of how that traffic gets to and from external memory. But fundamentally, I need you to go out and think AMBA 4. If you're designing a coherent system, you need to familiarize yourself with what coherency is. There's plenty of resources, as I've already said, to help you understand what that means. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm going to clock off now.
Question, right?
Yeah?
Yeah.
You stepping in?
Yes. Could you compare a little bit about AMBA 4 and the network on chip kind of architecture?
Okay, so the question is about AMBA 4 versus network on chip. I kind of wouldn't draw that. I'm going to tweak your question slightly. AMBA 4 is a specification that describes the interfaces and the protocol. It doesn't describe the implementation. So a network on chip would be an implementation layer detail. AMBA 4 can be supported in a network on chip environment. So these are the interface definitions and the protocol, which can be transported over any interconnect, whether it's network on chip or any other mechanism for that matter. So wholly compatible with network on chip in that sense.
What ARM processors support this interface, this bus interface?
So AMBA 4, ACE is A15, the Cortex A15. ACE Lite is the Mali T604 GPU, and they're the two the most recent processors that were public in the public domain. You can reasonably expect more to follow over the course of the next 12 or 24 months. Yep.
Does ARM give, as part of AMBA 4, the files required to support power-aware simulation?
So can you repeat that again? There's so much background noise.
Basically, for power-aware simulations, like the UPF or CPF power-aware simulation, related to the power optimization which has been done for AMBA 4, does ARM actually give those kind of models along with the kit?
I'm not 100% sure I understand your question. Let me try.
So I'm not just talking about the AMBA 4 standard.
Yep.
If I get an AMBA 4 kit for my implementation.
Okay, so you're talking about an actual implementation, yeah.
Exactly. So, and if we are doing an ASIC which is power aware, so does AMBA 4 give out the related models to make sure that the implementation you have on AMBA 4, we can simulate it?
I think I'm going to take that up with you offline. It's an easier one to do,
Okay.
perhaps in a less noisy environment, because I'm struggling to hear your
Sure.
question. But I think I understand your question, yeah. Any other questions before we vanish?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
See, you're good. You're better than you thought.
So which kind of latencies are you shooting for? Let's say you have an invalidate or something.
So latencies in what respect? Static latencies, dynamic latencies?
Dynamic latencies.
Dynamic latencies. Okay, so how long have you got? We got a couple of hours?
You can give me a range.
No, I can't. What I can say is that static latencies will depend on your implementation. Okay, so if you're implementing AMBA 4, there's a static latency, and that'll be dependent on how good you are, but there's physical limits to that, right? In terms of dynamic latency, it depends on your traffic and your loading. It depends on contention. It depends on how you handle quality of service. You know, latency is, it could be many thousands of cycles if you're really rubbish. It could be a lot less than that. I mean, typical round-trip latencies you should be shooting for in a high-performance system, it should be in the hundreds maximum. 100, 125 if you're good on the CPU basis. That means you're shit hot, though, really good. But then you've got other devices that come along that may swamp your system. You know, very bandwidth generators matters might try and take all that bandwidth. They push your latencies up. So then you need a quality of service scheme to handle that. So my answer really is it depends on your traffic, depends on your QoS scheme. Their implementation details, AMBA 4 is kind of above that level. It's about interface specification and protocol. But more than happy to have a conversation with you about that if you'd like. Okay, any other questions, or are we done?
I think we're done. Thank you so much, Michael.
My pleasure.